is Notsam Wrestling.
Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
I thought episode 1 of The Last Ride was great. Episode 2 was even better. The story that this is going through, you're sort of, I think by episode 2 of The Last Ride, you really start to figure out what this docuseries is all about. And it's about The Undertaker and his quest to have that perfect poetic moment to go out on. And I think I said this last week, but really the only person that I can think of in wrestling, well, I guess there's two people. I feel like Stone Cold Steve Austin went out on a perfect poetic moment and never came back. And we can ignore the tag match that's going to be featured next week on The Last Ride on episode 3. But Shawn Michaels, for all intents and purposes, his career ended at WrestleMania 26, right? Yeah, 26. So, in a match with The Undertaker. That's when I consider Shawn Michaels' in-ring career to be over. And I feel like that was that poetic moment. But The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels had The Undertaker to give him that moment. You watch The Undertaker, and he's on this quest to get that moment. And there is some really good foreshadowing. I mean, really good foreshadowing. There's this one moment. They're backstage at the 2018 Royal Rumble. And The Undertaker is only there to watch Michelle McCool compete in the Rumble match. And he's like, oh, man, that's one guy I'd like to get an opportunity with. That's one guy that missed me, AJ Styles. He just gets it. And it's just this moment, but you see this foreshadowing of what is to come. In my mind, this docuseries is not chronicling his time up until the Last Ride match. There's no doubt in my mind that this docuseries is going to lead to his real last match, which will be against AJ Styles in a traditional one-on-one match. I would think that they're going to try to wait, even if they have to wait a year, that they're going to try to do it in front of an audience so they don't have to figure out how to do it in a non-traditional way. But, you know, I feel like when you look at the career of The Undertaker and how much he cares about these moments and how much he needs to leave on a high, coming off of WrestleMania 34, he didn't wrestle at WrestleMania 35, which I hope they get into on The Last Ride next week. But he didn't have a match at WrestleMania 35. He came out the night after and attacked Elias, but that was it. He ends up doing the Saudi show where it was him and Kane versus Triple H and Shawn. Terrible match. He ends up doing the match with Goldberg. Terrible match. You know, there's all this. And then WrestleMania 36 comes, and he has this great match. He has the Boneyard match. You know, I guess he did have that one match after Goldberg at the pay-per-view after. But still, it was a good match, and it was like, it reminded you, okay, The Undertaker still can do it. But it wasn't the moment that people were waiting for, you know? It wasn't the WrestleMania moment. And I think that he might have intended for that to happen when AJ versus Undertaker was first being talked about, because AJ versus The Undertaker was being talked about well before we all got locked down. So I believe that there will be another AJ Styles versus Undertaker match, and I believe that no matter how long they have to wait, if we ever go back to watching wrestling in arenas full of people, I think that we will see The Undertaker versus AJ in that environment. You know, I think that a really interesting moment in this week's episode was looking at The Undertaker. If you look, last week's episode, it ended with The Undertaker coming off of his match against Roman Reigns. And he wasn't disappointed. He didn't come across as being disappointed. He was on that high that a lot of performers get, a lot of superstars get coming off of a big match. And it's interesting, and it's not really talked about, and you don't see a lot of evidence of it, because it's just in those moments after a big match, a big game for other athletes, a big performance for maybe theater actors that's live and in front of people, there is this high that you have to come down off of. And we witnessed that on this week's show. We witnessed what the high was like when The Undertaker had just put his coat and gloves and hat down in the middle of the ring, and he had finished. The match with Roman was over. Whether it went the way he wanted or not, it was over. It was finished. He had put a stamp on it. But it wasn't until that high wore off that reality started seeping in, and you start to wonder, because that feeling doesn't really seep in until that high has worn off. If The Undertaker versus Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 34 was Undertaker's last match, we would not have remembered the fact that that match wasn't as good as it should have been. We would have remembered the moment in the ring, The Undertaker taking his hat and his coat and his gloves off, The Undertaker saying goodbye, and then we would look back on the career as a full body of work. It makes me think that there will always be a reason that a performer like The Undertaker can think of that will trick himself into thinking he's got to get back in the ring. And I don't think it's a flaw. I think that he's addicted to performing at the highest level possible. And that's a really, really difficult thing to just simply walk away from. Steve Austin did it. Shawn Michaels did it. But look, I mean, Shawn Michaels was not only convinced to get back in a ring, but he's back working full-time with WWE again. So it's a difficult thing to walk away from, for sure. And we see that so much, and I won't spoil everything, so much about the relationship that Vince McMahon and Undertaker had. And the fact that it goes back and forth. When you're seeing these guys both talk about each other with tears welling up in their eyes, I don't think any of us realized how close those two were and how familial and, father-son their relationship feels like. But for me, the part about episode 2 that left me with goosebumps was the build-up to the WrestleMania 34 match. 34 match, yeah, between The Undertaker and John Cena. Now, I've always thought that match was something I've had a lot of questions about because it was not built in a traditional way. Of course, that was the match where they didn't officially announce the match was happening, ever. They said that John wants this match to happen. John's going to go to WrestleMania. He's going to sit in the audience. Sam Roberts is going to yell, "Action is on the way," 200 times on the pre-show, standing right in front of him. And then he's going to hope that The Undertaker shows up. So there was no, this is it. This is when it's going to happen, The Undertaker and John Cena. So already, you're like, this iconic match is not getting advertised. I mean, as fans, it was interesting watching how much they did to try to cover up the fact that The Undertaker was in the building. Because as fans, we all knew it was going to happen. We all knew there was no way. But there was also, I think for me, and probably a lot of other people, we felt like maybe the reason that they weren't full-on advertising this match was because maybe it isn't going to happen. Because the health of The Undertaker is always drawn into question. And coming off of WrestleMania 33 and how he looked with Roman Reigns, maybe they're going to have to make this call at the last minute. Maybe he thinks he's going to be able to get back into shape, but he actually won't be able to. And that's why they're not fully saying, okay, we're going to do this. Because The Undertaker talked about in episode 1 his confidence issues that struck him after WrestleMania 30. And when you watch him, when you look at his face as he's going to the ring for WrestleMania 34, even though he knows the match is only going to be 5 minutes, he knows he can pull it off. He knows everybody wants to see him. It's as sure a bet at that point. He's put the work in. It's as sure a bet at that point. And you're in there with John Cena, who's the professional of all professionals. It's as sure a bet as you could ever have at a WrestleMania. And you can still see it all over his face. You can still see that he's in performer mode. You can see the butterflies. You can see, nervousness is probably not the right word, but you can see the intensity, the single-mindedness, the fact that this is the only thing in the world in that moment that he cares about. And there's a lot of performers at The Undertaker's age that have the body of work that The Undertaker does, that if you're going out there at WrestleMania for a 5-minute match, you don't have to have that level of intensity. You can just go out there, run your greatest hits, come back and say, okay, that was fun, I'll collect my check. But that's not The Undertaker. And that was very clear. Just looking at his face, you can't lie about that. You can't make up a documentary around that. You can't make things seem like something they aren't when you can look at his face as he's being golf carted to the ring. And you can see it. You can see the emotion all over. And I'm getting chills right now just thinking about it because they didn't really expressly say why that match was only 5 minutes. Undertaker even said, I was ready to go 40 and they only gave me 5. He said he wanted to have the match of the night. There wasn't anything from John Cena said he wanted to tell a story of bringing the Undertaker back. You know, there wasn't any explanation as to why that match was only 5 minutes long. And I think I realized why it was 5 minutes long as I was watching. And I think that it started when you watch The Undertaker and Vince McMahon have this meeting. And in the commentary of it, The Undertaker says, you know, I told Vince, I don't know if I can do this. And Vince said, yeah, that's fine. I don't know if you can either. And he said that Vince is usually this guy who's like, no, you can do this forever if you put your mind to it. Vince is the rah, rah, rah guy. So when Vince was not going rah, 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 it made The Undertaker question. It made The Undertaker question, what angle is Vince taking here? What level of salesmanship is Vince McMahon working on to get me in the right mind state to do what I need to do at WrestleMania? And then you see this story, and you see John Cena describing the story of bringing The Undertaker back. And you hear how hard The Undertaker is on himself. And you can feel and hear the confidence issues. You can first of all, you can feel it even as I felt it as The Undertaker was riding the thing up the ramp in New Orleans. When we had just seen him pick out which hat he's going to wear. We've seen him figuring out how he's going to warm up differently this time. Like, he's just put so much effort into every little thing that I could feel that he's got to be walking that razor-thin line as he's being risen up the ramp to walk down it into the ring in the Superdome. The Undertaker's got to be thinking, oh, God, I hope I can still do this. We watched him get the ring and practice with Primo and run the ropes and take bumps and make the video for Vince McMahon and do the whole thing. And then I realized that WrestleMania 34 was not about The Undertaker getting the send-off that he wanted. Bruce Pritchard, when he was talking about the match, he was talking about The Undertaker going out on his own terms. He was talking about The Undertaker giving that level of performance because that's how he wants to go out. But I believe that between Vince McMahon and John Cena, the goal was never to give The Undertaker the moment that he needed. The goal was never to satiate the appetite of The Undertaker. The goal was to give The Undertaker just enough that he could prove to himself that he still had it and that there was still more in the tank. The Undertaker said it multiple times right after the match when he's on that wrestler high, right after the match. He told the cameraman, I still got a lot more in the tank. He told Big Show, I trained for 40. He told, how did it feel out there, Undertaker? It felt short. That match was designed to increase the confidence in The Undertaker in real life, to remind The Undertaker who he is as a performer, and to get that fire burning in The Undertaker's belly again. And when that hit me, that the whole situation was orchestrated so that one man could continue to perform and continue to feel good about it, I went, oh my God. And then I said, Sam, your conspiracy theory mind is getting away with you. Why would they go that far for just one guy? And then you watched the clip earlier of Vince McMahon, who can't, when asked the question, what does The Undertaker mean to you? And what does The Undertaker mean to WWE? He can't answer the question because he knows emotionally he'll completely break down. You look at a picture from 1990, and there's 12 guys in it next to Vince McMahon. And The Undertaker is the only one that today stands next to Vince McMahon. You look at the new generation, and there's a lineup of chairs, and it's Razor, Diesel, Brett, Undertaker. And one guy stood by Vince the whole time. Even when you talk about Shawn Michaels, while he didn't go to WCW, he did walk away. The Undertaker was always there and gave everything. And Vince, because The Undertaker gave of himself when Vince was at his weakest, I don't think there's anything that Vince wouldn't do for that guy as a performer and as a person. And then I realized one step more, that this whole documentary, we're looking at The Undertaker and how, isn't it amazing how truly human Mark Calloway is? That we've been looking at this character for so long as an entity. The real draw of this documentary is, isn't it amazing not only that The Undertaker still cares, but how much he cares, how much he feels, how much of a human being he truly is. And then you realize that that's what these shows mean to these guys that perform on that level. That when you're at the top, it's not just about, hey, I want to be a big star, I want to make a whole bunch of money. It's about the performances. It's about having those spots. And after 30 years of being in the WWE, that The Undertaker can come with the greatest WrestleMania career of any superstar in history, that The Undertaker can come off of a match and go, I wish I had had more time, that it's just not enough. This is what I realized. What about what John Cena just did? I can't wait until there is a documentary series about what John Cena truly did. Because right now, I think we appreciate John Cena more than we used to. But we're still at this period where people want to talk about the fact that John beat the Nexus and all the storylines that John Cena went over on. All the times that John Cena was successful as a character. But nobody talks about the sacrifices of John Cena. Nobody ever. It's not a conversation that comes up. And that's because it's not a conversation that John Cena puts out there. John doesn't talk about it himself. But when you look at it, you go, oh my God. So this a few months ago, I think I was talking to Wade Keller, and I think it was around WrestleMania time. It must have been WrestleMania last year, maybe, at this point. I don't remember when it was. But we were talking about John Cena. And it occurred to me that John Cena went out there at WrestleMania 27 as the top guy in WWE. Current guy. He spent a year building up this story with The Rock. And he was willing, even though he was the top guy, to lose to The Rock. And you go, yeah, but Rock got his comeuppance. John Cena got his receipt on that. And while that is true, you have to keep in mind that from WrestleMania 27 to WrestleMania 28, I think that's what it was, right? 28? Yeah. From WrestleMania 27 to WrestleMania 28, or maybe it was 28 to 20. First time. It was. Whatever. Between the first John Cena Rock WrestleMania and the second John Cena Rock WrestleMania, that year, John Cena, even though he was supposed to be the top guy in WWE, had sacrificed his WrestleMania win for a guy that wasn't going to be there, The Rock, and just kind of admitted, look, he's a bigger star than me. The Rock is a bigger deal than me. And while John Cena came back the next year and he finally got that victory over The Rock, that was the last time John Cena ever main evented a WrestleMania. And I feel like that was 29. So it must have been 28 and 29 that The Rock and John Cena main evented together. 29 was the winning against The Rock. That was the last time John Cena ever main evented a WrestleMania. He went to 30 to have a match with Bray Wyatt, and after he went to 31 to have his match with Rusev. And you're going, but he won those matches against the young guys. Yeah, he did. But he was wrestling on the middle of the card. You don't think that John Cena feels that? You don't think that John Cena sits there watching the main event, whether it's Roman Reigns, whether it's Brock Lesnar, whether it's Seth Rollins? You don't think that he watches these guys and goes like, damn, that's my spot. Damn, I should be the top guy in the company, and I'm not because I'm wrestling in the middle of the card. You don't think on an emotional level, on the level of a performer, that John Cena feels that? But he just is a soldier. And then he goes to WrestleMania 34, and he has this match with The Undertaker. And a less giving person would sit there and go, even if The Undertaker wins, I want this to be a crowning moment. I want this to be an iconic moment in the history of John Cena. I want this to be the match that everybody remembers. Even if The Undertaker wins, I want The Undertaker to do, for me, what The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels did for Shawn Michaels, what The Undertaker and Triple H did for Triple H, what The Undertaker and other people have done for other people. I want that for me now. I want the greatest match of my career against The Undertaker, and I want it at WrestleMania. And instead, we can talk all we want about The Undertaker because this is his movie. But John Cena went out there and spent 5 minutes getting squashed by The Undertaker and then went home. And that's it. John Cena, as his era's top guy. And by the way, nobody has a 10-year run on top. People don't put John Cena on their Mount Rushmores. People don't talk about John Cena with Stone Cold Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan and all these guys, even though they should. They don't. And John Cena sucks it up and allows WrestleMania 34 to just be completely about somebody else. And it's not even like he can swallow his pride and say, well, yes, this year's WrestleMania is not about me. It's about this young guy, and it'll be about the future of the business. No. John Cena sacrificed himself for the history of the business. John Cena sacrificed himself because he knew that WWE as a company would be better with The Undertaker in it. And I believe wholeheartedly that the only reason John Cena got squashed at WrestleMania and the only reason that match was 5 minutes long is because John Cena sacrificed what could have been a selfishly amazing moment for himself and instead did the best thing for The Undertaker, which in turn was the best thing for the company in his mind, which was having The Undertaker back in the fold. And it's not like he even did it to set up a rivalry with The Undertaker that would continue. He just took the loss and kept going so that The Undertaker felt like he could get back in the ring and there was more that needed to be done. I mean, that level of sacrifice for a performer, the show of shows, WrestleMania, I'll just be there so The Undertaker can have this moment. You don't get those moments back. There's always next year. You don't get, yes, there's always next year. But you don't get WrestleManias back. You don't want one WrestleMania moment. WrestleMania comes along and you're like, I'm in a position to make it special for myself. And when you just give one of your WrestleManias away, when you're John Cena, and you can theoretically, what we've been led to believe, do whatever you want, and that's what you choose to do, that's an unbelievable sacrifice to make. You know, I can't wait. I can't wait until the conversation about who John Cena is and what he truly did for WWE becomes a more prevalent conversation. Because I just think the world of that guy. Especially after seeing that and putting those pieces together, I'm blown away. Absolutely blown away. Even more so the fact that he didn't go and do 100 interviews explaining why. I've never heard him vocalize, this is why I did that. He just did it, and he kept it going. And this is my interpretation of everything. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but I don't think I am. I'm usually not.